Hi, this is Steve Hunt. For this episode of Integrated I spoke with Karie Willyerd, who is a chief learning officer at many companies. She's also started learning technology and has tremendous experience in the world of using technology to improve employee learning and development at all levels of learning and all different applications. She's worked for very large companies, very small companies, at all different types of topics. Has also written some great books. One of my favorites is a book called Stretch, which is about career development. So lots of interesting stuff that we talk about here. But a few of the things I'd call out, one is she talks about the challenges of getting budget to get technology and use technology. This is a world she spent a lot of time in, and sort of she gives some interesting advice on how do you convince an organization to invest in using technology to improve learning and development. She talks also about the role of human credibility in learning. She's a person that loves technology, but she says part of what drives learning is having someone who cares whether or not you learn, whether that comes from a compassion or a sense of accountability. How, when you're using technology to create a learning environment for employees, thinking about what is the role of humans in that, because there's a certain key component that has to do with, is somebody actually caring if I take this course or learn from this course or develop these new skills or capabilities? Last, she shares some really practical advice about learning in general. One of my favorites was she said, practice doesn't necessarily make perfect, because without feedback, practice often just makes permanent, as in making bad habits permanent. So I like that. Practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. But it also shares some other interesting things, including some really cool new AI technology that she's learning for learning, development, and health and well-being. So let's listen to Karie Willyerd on this week's episode of Integrate or Die. Hi, welcome to Integrate or Die. This week's episode, talking to Karie Willyerd. Karie and I have had the chance to work together for quite a few years. And Karie, I always start this podcast by telling you why I think you'd be a great guest on this show. And the reason is that you have been on the forefront of using technology to improve learning for a long time. You've been both a chief learning officer, you've been using it, you've also designed it, you're still super active in what's going on in this field. So that's how I would explain you. You are an expert in using technology to improve learning, both from a practical and a functional side. You've seen all sides of it. How would you describe yourself?
Well, there's the current career state, and then the bulk of my career. So the bulk of my career, I'm a 6-time chief learning officer or chief talent officer. With the latter half of the career being in technology. I was an entrepreneur and started up a software company, which I sold to SAP, and that is where we actually met, was at SuccessFactors SAP. And now I'm in fractional roles, and so I am working with a number of vendors who are technology companies or service companies to the training industry, and advising them on strategy and connecting to the marketplace.
Yeah. So looking back, the first question when we start, when you look at technology and as it relates to learning, we have to say the best technology to be really valuable doesn't have to be new. It just has to be impactful. And certainly there's a lot of technologies out there that may have been around for a long time that you're still amazed people aren't using. When it comes to this area of like learning, which people keep calling now it's upskilling. It was training, then it's learning, now it's upskilling. It's all the same thing, right? But when you think of technologies out there, are there still places where you go into companies and you're like, I can't believe they're not using this. We've had this around for a long time. Everyone should use it. What's a technology that's been around that you're like, come on, people, why aren't you using it?
I probably it's kind of funny. One of the reasons I wanted to do this chat with you is because my pet peeve is, I'm going to twist the question a little bit. Absolutely. What I see people not doing is tying their systems together.
Okay.
And so and partially that's because the whole learning technology infrastructure is represented by many thousands of companies. Mm-hmm. And no one who has like a whole comprehensive thing that goes together. So for example, we were, one of the most recent CLO positions I had was at Visa. And we were really getting close to tying together, not only tracking what learning people had taken using technology, but tying it to the CRM, mm-hmm. so that we could see, if you took this training, did it impact your sales performance history? Did it increase your, if you took a course on, how to develop leads,
Mhm.
did your pipeline increase as a
Mhm.
result of the course and so on? If you took a course on where we were at, if you took a course on particular products, did you sell more of those products?
Mhm.
So to me, it's surprising that it's taken us so long, and we still aren't doing this, where we've tied things together in interesting ways to automatically track the impact of learning on performance.
Yeah, I think, and that's what I definitely gets a little concept to integrate, which is tying learning to like financial technology, or you do CRM
Mm-hmm.
technology to say when people take this training, how does it affect the actual things, which supposedly we should have been doing for years. I agree. That is kind of amazing that people don't do it because it is absolutely doable. Why do you
Right.
think it is? Do you think it's that we're still really siloed? Like, why aren't you think this
Yeah.
is so obvious because it's beneficial for a learning professional to be able to show the actual impact your learning has. And it's certainly beneficial for a business to know the learning is worth doing, and some probably isn't worth doing. But why don't they do it?
Well, when you get down to it, the way corporate budgets work in most companies is each function
Hmm.
prepares their own budget. They make their own plans for what might be CapEx and OpEx. And technology usually is a bit of both,
Hmm.
CapEx and OpEx. And then you go into the priority scheme within that particular function. So there might be parts of it that would benefit the learning function, but in a way, sales has got to be on board with it, and the investment is really benefiting sales more. And so you've got to persuade, the sales function to put that as a top priority,
Hmm.
because the list of what, the line that gets, you've seen lines of here's what's going to make it this year in our tech investments, and here's
Right.
the below the line, and the below the line is almost always bigger than above the line. So
Hmm.
I just think because it's cross-functional, it falls in the below the line category, and just doesn't, because there's so many intriguing technologies out there to pick from, and to get one that's going to take multiple functions collaborating together to pay for it, it's going to be, interesting to.
It's like there's no chief integration officer, right, with a budget just designed to pull stuff together in that sense.
Right,
And so,
right.
yeah, I definitely think that. And it also, I wonder if part of it too is that if you're like a learning technology professional, you understand learning technology, you understand what it does. You don't really understand like sales performance technology. You might have some understanding, but you understand it in that detail. And you probably really don't understand the IT issues around linking these things together. So I wonder if part of it is simply
Right.
that there's sort of an anxiety around why would I spend money or implement something that I don't fully understand?
Yeah. I think what would be interesting is if the really big providers of CRMs,
Hmm.
for example, would get more interested in that question.
Hmm.
So, with Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or SAP, Oracle, would they look at their CRMs and say, it's going to really help you in sales if
Hmm.
you know what learning is contributing the most to growing your revenue. That
Hmm.
and then they should be looking at the integrations that need to be like partnerships or product expansions or whatever it might be. And that might be the better way to do it, instead of, what I used to say when I was a CLO is it just drove me crazy that essentially all these thousands of providers available to you put it on you, the customer, to do the integration.
Hmm.
And so it's not just buying a cool piece of technology to go do something for learning, whether it might be improving the experience of the author or the online facilitator or whatever it might be. It's that you have to go integrate with dozens of other systems in a company. I mean, the simplest being single sign-on.
Hmm.
So IT has to figure out the resources for, how many different functions are asking for new things that are going to require all those integrations. So I think a big problem is that we've put integration on the customer
Hmm.
instead of trying to figure out on the supply side how we could, uh, create more packaged integrations.
Yeah, I think it's a really good observation. I think you are starting to see that, like, the Workdays, the SAPs, or a lot of their partner strategies are moving more to this, but they don't tend to be integrations in the sense of understanding the value of applications. It's more just efficiency, single sign-on stuff like that, which is not
Mhm.
trivial. But if you think about what you're talking about, take the CRM. I've never been in a company that's happy with its CRM data. They're like,
Yeah,
and I think part of the reason that the data is not good is because it's only used for tracking. It's not used for understanding and improving, which is what you're talking about, right? It's like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, if people said, look, if you put this data in and then we use this data to analyze the things that we do with you that make you more successful, so it becomes a tool to improve the workforce, then I think people's attitude would be different. And it would make these CRM systems more valuable if the systems became tools for positive change as opposed to just tools for monitoring.
yeah, yeah. And I think another one of my things I want to reserve is the question to talk about is AI, because I've had the opportunity
Yeah.
to spend a lot of time over the last 2 years really diving into that world more. And I think things like, so I have a halftime role with Learning Technologies Group,
Mhm.
and we have a company, GP Strategies, and we do a lot of work with one of the major automakers. And so, to me, something that seems like it should be really feasible now is if you make design changes in a car, for example,
Mhm.
and you've got a user guide that goes out with that car, that
Mhm.
AI should be able to actually, look at the difference between this design, that design. Here's the old manual, revise it to create a new
Mhm.
manual. It seems to me like that's an integration that should happen instead of the manufacturing function hands over to a training function and says, we've made changes, now go figure out what the training is. I think the AI is going to be able to just automatically do that. We'll have to be thinking to ask AI to do that.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a new
You know,
application. I mean, content generation and content evolution, which is what AI is so good for. I think I want to kind of go back to the discussion 'cause it's really interesting. I totally agree with your point about we could integrate learning, and this is the classic thing, justifying the value of learning. I am curious though, when you look at other technologies, like when we first met, you had created this company Jambox that did social, one of the first applications of real social learning technology. Um,
mhm.
what are you seeing on the actual tools that help people learn better? As opposed to like
Yeah,
showing the value of learning. Like what are you in
right.
your career? What are you saying? This is the stuff that's made the biggest difference in actually helping people learn.
Yeah, so there's probably a couple of things in that space. First off, it's a mantra of people in corporate learning that adults learn from each other.
Hmm.
So it's not like going to a college class and listening to the sage on the stage and and then passing a test after. In fact, in a corporate learning environment, people bring applied experiences to a corporate university classroom, and those experiences just help each other figure out how you're going to apply some new principle, whether it's in the day when we were doing Six Sigma, for example, and understanding how that might be applied whenever there's any new management concept that you're trying to get across. So I think one of the most important things is figuring out how to make people actually connect, giving them this opportunity for the adults to learn with each other, which is why I guess one of the things we didn't mention, I don't have 3 or 4 books. It looks like you. I can't tell
You
if you
got
got.
some books, yeah. You got
I've
quite.
got some books.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm on. I'm doing snowbirding right now, so I'm not at home in my home office. I'm in Palm Springs.
Well, yeah, you wrote.
Um.
I'm going to give it a shout out. You wrote this fantastic book, Stretch, that I think was one
Oh,
of the
thank you.
best books for how to do career development in the modern environment. So,
Mhm.
which, to your point, stressed heavily relationships, and I think all the 5 to
And
thrive. I think it was beginning.
yes, networks. Yes, thank you. So, so I think one of the things that we found when we were doing some research for that was we asked people, what's your preferred way to learn? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean how do you learn best, but that's a separate question. But what's your preferred way to learn? And the worst performing mode for learning delivery was computer-based training. Just turning on. I mean, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Gosh, I hope I can take uh, you know, some sort of e-learning this morning."
Yeah.
Because it's very difficult to engage with
Hmm.
it. But people do look forward to, I took a course at MIT last year um, on AI and strategy. And it was learning from other people and from engaging with a real-time professor. I remember once when I was at Sun as the chief learning officer, and I was at a major bank in Switzerland, and talking to the CIO there saying, you should buy our library of Java training. And he said, I don't know who's teaching that course, this content that's all in there. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know who's teaching it. I don't trust it. I want live classroom so I can evaluate whether the instructor knows their stuff. And
Hmm.
then I want my people to be able to add their things to it. And I thought that's so uh, actually a brilliant observation. And so when we went back, Sun invented Java. So we got the inventor of Java to put more of his content in and then brand that the content was approved
Wow.
um, by him. And so I think this connecting people is a really important thing. This a second thing that I have. One of the companies I'm working with is called Uplimit, and they have a really interesting AI fueled cohort management learning platform. And many of them have previously worked um, at one of the big learning content providers where they were disappointed in the completion rate. So
Hmm.
somebody might sign up for a course on machine learning and work their way through a little bit of it and not finish. And the completion rate in most of these big uh, corporate libraries that you'll buy is less than 10%, by
Hmm.
much less than 10%. And they were getting, into the 80s and 90s on completion rates. And so it turns out that just even if it's all technology trying to connect you and engaging you, just frequent pinging and frequent, having an outcome based solution that is not just taking a test, but
Hmm.
is I have to create a project and have that project evaluated and that project being applied very close to what my work is. Those are real secrets to getting people to complete and engage in learning and really demonstrate some level of achievement.
Well, I think there's two things that you're hitting here, and it is interesting because it's the integration of learning technology with humans in the sense of
Mhm.
one, the first one is making sure that there's human credibility, which is an interesting one because increasingly we're going to have training is already being delivered by AI. It's going to be delivered more and more and more by AI. And these are sort of like, they may look like humans, but they're not humans. And it's like, why should I trust that technology? What human is behind it? That's a credibility. But the other thing that you hit on is the motivation to learn, the desire to engage in it. And there it's, the way I'd almost describe it is you could say evaluate, but almost like disappointment. There is a person who's doing this that expects me to show up, and if I don't show up, they're going to be, I think,
Oh, yeah.
a good instructor isn't angry at you. They're like disappointed in you. You're not being your full self. And as you were talking and giving that example of, people having a project, I was reminded a friend of mine who's doing a fitness workout and training. And he said, the biggest thing that's motivating him, he goes, is that I have this guy that shows up at 6 in the morning. And if I don't show up, he's all like, "Oh, you're not here."
Yeah.
And he's like, and I just don't want to disappoint him.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you look, I mean, it'll be interesting to look at like, technology tries to do that. So like Duolingo's example, I was doing Duolingo for a while, and if you did your lesson, these little bots would jump up and down. We're so excited. And I'm kind of like, I don't care personally that these little bots are jumping up and down, but I would care if it was an actual person.
Yeah.
So I wonder how that's going to play
So
out.
so some of the things that UpLimit has done is they've AI has created the letters and the reminders and things, but it looks like it's coming from it's signed by a human being, and the notes, and there is a human behind it. So because AI is tracking, here's where the learner is falling off, and it triggers then an alert to a human in the learning function. You might want to reach out because this learner is disengaging from the
And I think
course.
when I look at this, is I think the key thing too, that just psychologically difference is when it's this idea of caring. When it's a human, a person's literally giving you their life in the form of time to try to help you. We don't think of it that way, but that, I think as humans, that has a meaning to us. That's more meaningful to us than, we don't care if the technology is doing it. It's like, technology doesn't have limited time. So that's really fascinating. That sort of whole motivational side of it.
Let me tell you one other just like kind of side thing, because I have a secret first career, Steve. I may not have told you about my secret first career. I was a writer for a major daily.
Oh my God!
And you don't make any money.
Does not surprise me.
You don't make any money, and I was in my 20s, and so I switched over and went to work for a training company, and it was, eventually I was designing training for the simulators in nuclear power plants. And you would design scenarios, and your learners would come in and get this opportunity to be in, then it was a $10 million simulator. I have no idea how much it would cost now. I'm sure way more. And but you could make a person be in a high fidelity environment that also had high risk associated with it. So so I designed training there, and then the next company I designed training for was pilots. So in flights, I worked for a flight simulator company and did that there. So now we've got I've got a company that I'm the CLO in residence for, called Skillable, and we do labs that help you show your that you have learned, demonstrate that you've learned, and be there's an achievement at the end that is definitely proof that you have acquired the capabilities to do something. So I think it's this, that's kind of a theme that's running between these, is that at the end have something that you can say you did, not just passing a test or doing something. And how you get there is that, there's many ways to learn. You and I don't necessarily, it's not that we may have different learning styles, because a lot of that is, whatever. But you might decide you'd rather read something, and somebody else might want to just get out there and try it and tinker at it and, perfect and get feedback. so I think these platforms like Skillable that do the labs and so on are a key part of how we need to be thinking about learning technology going forward, where people can learn in many ways, but they get a way to demonstrate their skills, and that can go into some sort of skilling catalog inside an organization. That it's not just that I filled out a profile, because let's be honest, have you filled out every profile you've ever been asked to fill out on your skills?
No.
No.
No,
I'm
I
shocked,
need
Steve.
a chat bot to fill out those profiles. Well, I think what you're getting at is that one aspect of learning, and technology really enables this, and it is learning by doing, right? As opposed
Mhm.
to learning by sort of absorbing knowledge. So you can read stuff like that in the time for it. And you're like saying, well, we can, with these simulations increasingly, let people just jump in and try stuff out and mess around with it, which actually, if it's a task that's intrinsically interesting, that is gamification, but it's not gamification in the sense that we're going to take a task and try to turn it into a game. It's like people tinker with cars, for example. Why do people tinker with cars? Because they just find it intrinsically interesting, where other people would find it frustrating. So I think it's using technology to create opportunities for people to tinker around, mess with stuff, learn stuff they find interesting in a more engaging way, I think is really
Yeah.
powerful.
But
And
with a caveat, and that is that, you can finish this sentence for me, because, it's an old adage, practice makes,
perfect.
and that is not true. So
Yeah.
practice makes permanent. So
Yeah.
is what really happens, because this is really quite evident in my golf game, because I don't really care enough about golf to go out and get lessons and
Yeah.
feedback and everything. I just want to be in a beautiful environment and chat with
Yeah.
friends. So and golf is the excuse for
Yeah.
doing that. um but guided practice makes perfect, and
Mhm.
practice with feedback helps you become perfect. But not so you could be tinkering around with cars, and maybe eventually you'll get good at that
All
car
right.
tinkering. But if you had an expert beside you who said, no, 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 look, here's a shortcut to that and the other, you're going to learn way faster. So
Yeah.
it's the combination, and this is where multimodal AI is going to be very interesting, because it can observe you in your practice and offer feedback.
Yeah, and I think also combined with, metaverse technology, when we get into that, where,
Mhm.
the stuff on virtual reality training that I've looked at is that it's really valuable for a couple things. One, it makes stuff more engaging. As a matter of fact, before this, you were telling me about that fitness app that's a virtual immersion app. And what does it do? It makes the stuff that you're doing just more interesting and engaging.
Mhm.
But also it can be a really key part of learning for certain kind of tasks. And I think it was, really interesting. One is space tasks that require spatial awareness, like loading trucks or stuff like that. But the other one is emotional control. I thought it was really interesting, where you're actually interacting with a person and they're getting angry, and how do you calm them down, and it triggers emotional reactions in our brain. So I think that's it's really going to be fascinating to see how our technology evolves on those areas. And in particular, as you're talking about this too, like everyone talks about the impact of AI, is the human skills like caring, empathy, all that stuff are going to become more important. Well, those are
Yeah,
trainable
I,
skills.
I actually don't agree with that, by the
You
way.
don't agree with that?
I don't, because AI, in repeated study after study after study, is showing more better skills at empathy than humans. So I think the uniquely human skills. I've gone to the TED AI conference for the
Yeah.
last 2 years. I'm staying pretty immersed in the emerging research in this space. And I think it's a bit of a cop out to say, well, the emotional part of that AI isn't going to get. Too many studies are showing
Yeah.
that.
No.
Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating. I think this kind of gets back to what we were talking earlier, though, about the impact of people on people's interest and desire and feeling of satisfaction from training, which is going back to as I was saying, like you've disappointed somebody if you don't show up or you
Yeah,
don't do
yeah,
it, or somebody's sincerely excited to see you advance. You can never get that from AI. It can simulate it, but at the end of the day, if you know it's a machine, it's a machine. And yeah, could we get to the point where you don't even know it's a machine? Perhaps, but I think at some point we'll probably have to start putting things in to say, I'm not a machine, because
yeah,
it goes back to that caring component of learning and development, which is caring is defined as a person giving their life in the form of time and attention to another person. It's an
yeah,
organic process.
yeah.
So the question is, we may need people to get much better at demonstrate they truly care, which
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
fascinating, because I don't think the way I always talk, the analogy I always use is, our bodies weren't, I would say some processed food is better than no food, but we've learned our bodies weren't meant to live off processed food.
Mhm.
AI coaching and all that sort of stuff like that is probably better than no coaching, but I don't think that our brains were meant to live off of artificial intelligence. It's we need
Yeah,
some blend. We need some blend in this.
right. Yeah. I do think though that there's, I mean, when you think about how we do some training, here's a classic. So many leadership programs. We're using the same approach and design as we did in the 80s when I first started
Mhm.
in training. But, so for example, you've been in this scenario where the instructor says to you, okay, go into groups of three, and I want one of you to play the manager and one of you to play the disgruntled
Mhm.
employee. And you're going to follow this process, and the third person is going to take notes. Okay.
Right.
Well, first off, no one ever plays the great disgruntled employee well enough. And they respond in a way, as soon as you start to follow the process, they, immediately comply and they do. And everyone hates these little role play things because they know they're phony,
Mhm.
even though it's humans doing it. Now, imagine that you're in some sort of, it could just be, off a laptop, it could be in virtual reality, but each of those other characters that you're interacting with, besides yourself, are their own little trained GPTs.
Yeah.
So one is a trained GPT, disgruntled employee, who is going to dynamically respond to you. This is where
Mhm.
gaming is going. Is a
Yeah.
great article in MIT about technology, about where gaming is going in this space, where you're going to be running into all these little chat GPTs that are going to feel very human in their
Mhm.
interaction with you. And the person in the game, in this learning game, was the evaluator for the process, is actually much more sophisticated and has access to tens of thousands of pages of resource
Mhm.
guides that it's giving you feedback on, and it's watching your body language, and it's watching. I think that's going to be not only a richer experience but a more accurate experience and help you hone your skills. And it's not another human there at all, but it has been informed by human knowledge to
Ye
get to that place.
Yeah, I think, you're going earlier, you talked about the difference between preferred mode of learning versus effective mode of learning. Those aren't the same thing. It really gets to just saying, like, there's the motivation to learn and there's the actual activity of learning. And sometimes the most
Mhm.
effective way to learn is not the most enjoyable. Um, I think what you're getting into is with this AI is that AI is radically changing what's going to make it effective, but then we have to get people engaged. And I think the human side is always going to play an important role that we don't, we can't, in some cases, yeah, things will just be intrinsically interesting. I like this because I like it. It's like people play video games because they like playing video games, right? And you could definitely imagine
Mhm.
taking that into a learning video games. Well, there was a whole book written about this, right? Teaching people to become, what was the Ready Player One? Did you ever see that movie?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So, but the the other side though is I do think for some learning, like having some sense of there's a person that cares that I'm learning, and that's going to be motivated. Because I think what drives some sense of purpose in life is doing things for other living things. Kind of gives us a sense of purpose. So
yeah.
that's be fascinating. It's going to be. I think we might even start seeing that really play out. How do we get people excited about learning versus what's the most effective way to teach them?
Yeah, learning and performing. We were talking about
And
this virtual reality
yeah,
fitness game that I'm doing, and part of course, it's at scale, and so but you have your own modified leaderboard. So of people maybe you've done a fitness class
Hmm.
together with, or your friends and network that you've talked into
Hmm.
doing this thing with you as well. And it's not the facilitator. Again, I'm going back to this adults learn from one another. It is
Hmm.
that my friend has, gotten so many points this week from her fitness, and I can look and see what songs she's listened to and
Hmm.
worked out to and what her fitness is, and we motivate each other. We high five each other asynchronously.
Yeah.
And if one of us isn't on over the course of a week,
Hmm.
we'll, send a text and say, "Hey, you feeling
Right.
okay? So you haven't been on the." And so it's what a great way to scale, because there's not a fitness instructor that's having to do that. It is the people that you are your friends
Yeah,
that.
it's the social context going, the social
Mhm.
context of learning, which yeah, it's fascinating how these things are evolving because the technology is changing our ability to create social connections with learning. It's also radically changing how we do learning in so many ways. I want to kind of like switch to the next question, though, as we're going on with this, which we're talking about this cool stuff and all this technology. What about failures or mistakes? What are things that you're like, when it comes, particularly comes to like using technology for learning, that are like, stop this. We shouldn't have done it. We shouldn't, we're still doing it. You talked about the example of like some of the role plays you're saying, but are there technologies out there just like the world will be better when we realize this is just stupid. We shouldn't do it anymore.
I would say I've come to a place where even if I see something that does one teeny tiny little thing that's cool, really cool,
Hmm.
but I have to figure out how to, like, put it into a bunch of stuff, and it's just a waste of time, that instead. So uh, I'll make up a company name for a real one with a conversation I had with someone just in the last few days. He had invented a company, and I actually used uh, his technology, but all it did was send reminders out. So let's say uh, uh, Tuesday ticks, let's call it,
Hmm.
and it's what here's some just reminders from your learning, and that's all it did. It just
Hmm.
sent out five things as a reminder.
Hmm.
And so then you've got all this technology that you've got to kind of bring in, and then you got to talk all your designers into using it. And it's all independent. It's not easy to do. It just actually layers on more works for the people that are creating the learning, so that they don't have time to, do other things. It's just these little one-off tools that and this is how many companies get started. It's a garage project with a few
Right.
developers, and it's easy to do, and it's a one-off thing. And I'm totally over one-off things.
It's interesting. Actually, you're hitting on something that was researched. One of the myths that I'll say is that older people don't learn technology as fast as younger people. That's not true.
Yeah.
What is true is the older you get, the more skeptical you are about the value of learning technology. Because how many killer apps that are going to transform the world have we seen at this point? It's like,
Yeah.
I guess you get more, you're more conservative in your use of time. That's not kind of that change. I think
Yeah. And
it,
it is true that there are people that keep on learning their whole life, and there are people that don't develop a habit of learning.
yeah,
Like there's an amazing number of people. I don't have this number right, but it's something like 20 or 30% of all people who graduate from college never read another book in their life.
that's
And
crazy.
so, yeah, so especially to us authors,
I know, my gosh. It's
you mean
wrong.
everybody hasn't read Stretch?
That's that's really well, you think of that issue about all these little one-off things, but I really do wonder that how that is the whole concept of integration, which is probably saying whenever you're building an application of any form, think that it has to fit in some larger context, and how do you tie that in? Yeah, it was a funny story. I was talking to somebody actually this morning who had used some application that was a note taker that would show up in your meetings in note taker. And that doesn't really need it anymore because these note taking features are being built into everything. She goes, but I can't turn it off. It follows me around everywhere.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I've got a couple of AI tools I need to turn off because they've been outdated already because the AI larger LLMs have made it possible to do
Yeah.
it without the app.
What is when you look at the technologies and all these changes a wish list? If you're saying, I wish somebody would build this. You talked earlier that there's things that we already have and not using, like integration, and showing the
Mhm.
financial value of learning, stuff like that. But is there anything you're looking at saying, this is something I wish somebody would build. This would make the world,
Yeah.
which what your work would be better if somebody else would build this thing.
Well, I do think and this is not far away, but I do think an authoring platform that allowed instructional designers to create personas and mini GPTs to interact with people in digital learning
Hmm.
is I'd really like to see that because I think that would be fun to interact with as a learner.
Hmm.
If I go into something and then I'm interacting with a very uh, quasi intelligent um, and trained GPT in a particular topic area. I think that would be really intriguing. And that's actually quite easy to do, but somebody hasn't created a platform to do that yet.
Right. Yeah.
An
Because I was saying,
easy,
like,
easy platform for authoring. It's can't be far away.
no, I agree. Because I mean, you can do that like in Chat GPT. A matter of thing I was messing around with was making a Steve GPT, which taking all the stuff like you. I've written so much stuff I can't remember everything I've written, and
Yeah.
you know, and some of it's probably not worth remembering. But
Or, I've changed my mind
yeah,
on,
but
you
my
know,
idea is I was kind of messing around with it. I could take everything I've written and I could dump it into a giant small language model. It would be like Ask. And it's funny, I was saying, call like Ask Steve. And then I discovered that this is a weird factoid. A lot of AI products are called Steve. There's like, I know, I
that is
mean,
true.
I'm
I
not
know.
making that up. This
I
guy
know.
sent another guy, another Steve I know, like posted
Yeah.
something going something like 10 brothers, like sell with Steve, ask
Oh, yeah.
Steve, coach with Steve.
Yeah. My husband's name is Steve, and
Well,
he's a scientist. Now in his second career, but there's a whole meme in science of Steves who've signed on.
oh, that's right. Yes,
Yeah.
I don't know. So maybe I'm the future of AI. Maybe we're Steve.
Yeah.
So the last question, this is is that we always ask is this show is about really promoting and advancing the use of technology to improve the world of work in effective ways. And part of that is going to have people to do it. This has been a growing field. And if you kind of look at this, what guidance would you give to a person who's like interested in saying, wow, I want to really get into this use of technology to improve learning. This would be a career I'd like to have. You've certainly had an amazing career. What advice would you give them, a person thinking about going into a career in HR technology, particularly around learning?
Yeah. I think for one thing, you've got to have kind of a natural desire to play with technology. Are you the
Mhm.
kind of person who is pretty much getting the latest iPhone or Droid uh, toy?
Mhm.
And you like to tinker with technology a bit. You like having the refrigerator that's got technology in
Mhm.
it. So first off, it ought to be kind of something that you feel
Mhm.
motivated to continue to learn for, and you think you will want to your whole life
Yeah.
because it changes so fast. You must keep learning. If
Mhm.
if we had stopped learning about technology when we were first both in SAP, well, that would have been pre-cloud. And so we'd
Yeah.
still be, stuck in, on-premise thought processes kind of
Yeah.
thing. So you kind of got to be a person who likes to learn, is very intrigued with it. I think there's a room in every field for the person who's not a technologist, but is very tech curious,
Mm-hmm.
to be the bridge to technology. So that's why I stay educated on what's emerging in technology,
Mm-hmm.
because not because I'm ever going to be a machine learning expert or an AI expert, but I'll develop some ideas and thoughts that they're not even thinking about. So here's my latest one that I think is going to be really intriguing, and that I want to work on doing some writing about, which is what's it going to mean to a manager who is managing not only Steve,
Mm-hmm.
but Steves who are using AI and independent agentic AI whose name might be Steve as well. But that is, and I think the manager's job is going to get much more complex, because they are going to have to be directing not even workforce, but the work that is done by a hybrid workforce of humans, AI, and humans plus AI. And I think we're not talking very much about that yet. And I don't think the technologists would be thinking about that. And a person who's in HR or learning isn't yet thinking about that. So that's where there's kind of this place between the two worlds. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that from a career perspective, whether your world is marketing or your world is finance,
Mm-hmm.
it's saying, how can I be the translator
Yeah.
and the interpreter of how to apply that within our world.
Yeah, I think that does get in. One of the obvious to say is that our understanding of technology enables and it constrains our imagination of how we could do different things. And I
Mhm.
think that point about, I mean, I see in my own career, although I did start as a computer programmer, I wasn't a very good one. I was fascinated with what computers could do. I didn't actually want to program them though.
Mhm.
But I think that's really interesting, looking at that and having that intrinsic desire and then being a translator. But that point you too made about like, how do we need to teach people to operate in an AI saturated world is
Mhm.
going to be very different for sure. Well, there was a book you and I both recently reviewed, and I don't know if I won't say it, but when I read it, like part of this feels like it was written by AI. And and I actually gave that in the feedback. I said, this part, but it was a different way of reviewing the book because I was like, well, should I
Yeah.
be applying the same standards to this
Yeah.
section versus the section written by a human? And should
Yeah.
I be worried about the feedback? I'm not worried about hurting the feelings of AI.
Yeah.
you know?
Which is
um,
maybe a benefit, because then you're more honest if it's just AI. But if it's one of your buddies that's writing
well,
the,
that was my
the book,
fear. I
you want to
actually
be.
put that in there. I put this comment. I'm like, this section feels like AI. And oh, please, I hope this wasn't written by a person. But well, hey, the very last question we always ask Karie to wrap this up is there a question that we should be asking you about the future of HR technology that I didn't ask? And the caveat is you need to answer it.
I think I wove it in over the course of this conversation, because in our list of questions, we didn't have AI as a specific topic, and yet
Yeah.
I brought that in all along. So I think I kind of wove it in as part of the conversation today.
No, it was great. It was fascinating, and just sort of the reverberations that not just having AI for training, but the shifting role of humans is
Mhm.
there will always, I believe, be a really critical role for humans in learning because again, the motivation, the carrying, all that. But what that role is radically changing, and we
Yeah,
don't know
it
what that
is.
is yet. So it's fascinating.
Yeah. And it's not just about upskilling, because there are mindsets that have to
Mm-hmm.
shift as well. And I can learn how to mechanically do something, but not necessarily be persuaded that I should do something. And
Yes.
so there's it is a lot more complex than just does someone have a skill to do something? But
Yeah. And we
yeah,
didn't even get into the whole issue of people don't learn well when they're highly anxious and they're worried about their job security. So that's a whole
yeah,
other element.
yeah, right.
But that would be a whole nother podcast. Well, Karie, thank you so much for taking time to
Thank
appear on
you.
Integrator Die. Fascinating conversation. And I'm really excited to see what you do next. It's always fabulous, whether it's a book or
Yeah.
a tech or a project. So thank you.
Well, literally next, this is my hour when I'm going to go play Supernatural and go work out in my VR fitness world. So,
So, well, have fun.
all right.
Okay. Talk to you
Thank
later.
you.
Bye.